Why do we need to create communities of size larger than the Dunbar number? Why can't we have sub-Dunbar communities?
Well, part of it is a stabilization function. If we, um, well, as I have looked at the dynamics of small groups, part of the issue that happens is that, well, there's a lot of things that can and do actually happen. One of them is that you need to look at the relative pressures of the three marketplaces, right? The marketplace of labor, the marketplace of intellect, and for lack of a better word, the marketplace of sexuality. And so what happens is that the relationship between these is unequal, right? Labor has a additive effect, intellect has a multiplicative effect, and sexuality has an exponential effect. And so in this particular sense, um, the dynamics of the small group process effectively end up getting skewed by what would be effectively mate selection dynamics. So in effect, there's a need to work at post-Dunbar scales in order to compensate for that, right? Because what ends up happening is that you end up with essentially shifting coalitions of even smaller subgroups that end up dominating the larger group process, or essentially just skewing the balance, and the Gini coefficient starts going up. And that's unfortunately a problem, because you don't want the thing to collapse back into a popularity contest and/or some sort of hierarchical organization, because that's part of the reason that things went wrong in the first place. There's a structural relationship between hierarchical process and transactional process. So in this sense, um, it's actually easier to get the right outcome at post-Dunbar scales. Now, how do we get to post-Dunbar scales? Well, obviously, in one sense, we're already there, right? The world has 1 billion people in it, or 8 billion people in it, right? The specific number is not that important, but it's way more than Dunbar 1. So in this sense, um, there's a degree to which we are already operating at those scales. We might as well get good at it, right? When we're thinking about city and city-state process and so on and so forth, remember that civilization is partially understood in terms of the notion of civility and partially understood in the notion of city. And city is going to be post-Dunbar no matter how you think about it. So to some extent, there's a need for us to be skillful in that particular range, because that's already present as something that is required. So those are two reasons, you know. Um, the other part of it too is that, in the way that I'm thinking about this and holding it, it's not that I have, some fundamental aversion to market-based process or transactional-based process. It's just that it needs to be clamped as something that is held within a community context, rather than essentially having the community context being held within the marketplace context or a commercial context, the way it currently is in the world. So we've got to get that switched around. Um, and so again, if I try to stabilize it as a bunch of sub-Dunbar communities, the notion of ownership or the notion of transactional process ends up not being stable for a whole different series of reasons. In effect, the level of scale at which the notion of reification of choice, who gets to make what choices about what, when, where, and how, so to speak, um, this is this is something that wants to be held at a post-Dunbar scale for a whole different set of reasons. I.e., if you make it smaller than that, then again, it plays back into the sexual selection dynamics. At this point, all I'm really doing is just alluding to what the answers are. They're in this space. It's just that it gets technical pretty quickly. So I'm just going to leave it at that for now. But it gives you a flavor as to part of the reason why post-Dunbar scales are important.